му рече господин градоначелник, јас реков не, тој никогаш не бил градоначелник, тој е институција сам по себе. Тоа е пример во од дека социјализмот уште може да функционира. Ви благодарам, господине. Ветуваме дека ќе го донесеме на Тиранскиот форум. Се надевам, затоа што причината која што ми ја даде не беше многу убедлива. Тој рече не може да дојдам во Тирана се уште заради здравствени проблеми. Како тогаш можете да дојдете во Северна Македонија тогаш? Или малку тука се чувствувате како во Грција, а? Нема да должа многу, но треба да додете во Тирана. Благодарам многу.
Продолжиме со госпоја Катерина за нејзиниот настан. Благодарам. Good afternoon. Let us begin. We are a little bit late with the agenda because after this panel there will be lunch. Thank you all for your attendance, and I would like to express gratitude to the organizers for providing us with this opportunity, this meeting, to talk about the cooperation and the future of the region during a very difficult year that affected us all. There have been not so many meetings held with physical presence, so this is an interesting experience from that point. We have a very interesting panel of guests. I would like to wish you welcome. I'm not going to take too long because we have limited time. I will start with the lady, our governor, Anita Angelovska-Bezhovska, Stefan Peter, the president of the Foreign Investors Council, Fatmir Besimi, the Minister of Finance and the Vice Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Fatmir Bitici, and Zoran Jovanovski, Vice President of the Economic Chamber. I will start with the Vice Prime Minister. This was a very difficult year, even though the crisis was a health crisis, not an economic, but still the economic parameters were most affected. What would be your assessment of the economic situation, and are you concerned about the assessments that could be a new wave and continuation of the recession? Thank you for your question. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers, the Delphi Economic Forum and the Hellenic Business Association. The question is, in order to be able to answer this question, I would probably need to do a brief retrospective about everything we've gone through. And there is a very interesting saying that the Minister of Finance uses frequently. The only thing that we could foresee was the unforeseeable. So in 2021, talking about the beginning of the crisis in March 2020 and everything we've been going through, it's obvious that some of the results and the consequences were not such as expected at the beginning of the crisis. And when we compare ourselves to the other countries, we would think we did well. Others might say that we are comforting each other, but obviously the others will also say that I believe that what's the situation, what's the state of the economy. In order to say what's the state of the economy today, we have to point out the measures we have undertaken in order to help the economy in the previous period. I do believe that what we've done so far during the economic and health crisis gave even more than what the biggest optimists expected as a result. This gives us an opportunity to talk about positive results. Almost all statistics available for each coming months, and I'm not going to use figures now because there are other colloquiators that will be pointing out the figures, show a tendency of recovery of the economy, which is a positive aspect for our country. But for me, it is especially important whether during this period, when the economy is in its recovery, whether we are using and making use of the opportunities. I believe Prime Minister Zaev in his speech, as well as the others from the government, saw the crisis as an opportunity. We all talk about certain areas where we are starting either to have local initiatives or regional initiatives that should improve the competitiveness of our economy and the competitiveness of the regional economy. And at the end of last year, at the Berlin summit, we pointed out that we are really hoping and striving, working for a joint economic zone, and we as a government talked about the regional competitiveness versus regional competition, which would mean practical step forward towards making use of the potential of creating potential that resulted from the pandemic, and that's to be part of the value chain of the more developed economies, or to point at with a simpler language how to make use of the opportunity, of the possibility offered from the faraway Asia, that has shown that the fact that you are linked to a value chain which is far away from your production could create realistic problems. That's a segment that we saw as an opportunity, and we work on that segment. And I believe that's the only way to talk about the issue whether we can expect our economy to develop. Another moment we saw, and I believe that the chambers of commerce made their contribution, is to see a little bit wider with the intervention investment plan, which is a comprehensive plan for the next 7 years that should accelerate the growth of our economy even more. We'll go back to that plan. Thank you for pointing out the thing that the crisis could be seen as an opportunity, which is an interesting way of looking at things. Dear Minister of Finance, what's the state of the budget? You mentioned that due to the good collection of taxes, there will be readjustment of the budget. What are you going to spend the money on? So, thank you. This whole situation related to COVID, and in a phase when we are almost in the second calendar year of, so more than a year dealing with COVID-19, to be able to share positive news is absolutely important for the business community, and those are the figures in the budget. In comparison to the previous budget, de facto there is a greater level of revenues. So by 20 June, 15% of increase we see. If we go into further details about the tax revenues, there is a 19.3% of increase, which is 15.8% increase in comparison to last year. But even last year, when, as the Vice Prime Minister mentioned at the time when I made a statement about the budget in 2021, that the only thing we can predict is that it's unpredictable. And we said that at the mid of the year, there will be a readjustment of the budget. We didn't know that this will happen, but it's a good thing that the revenues are higher. Another good thing is that the readjustment of budget will see additional funds for the subsidies, for the support of the economy during this COVID period, and to increase the capital expenditures. So in the budget, they'll be increased for 27% in comparison to the initial budget, so 11.3% of the total expenditures of the budget. Then the measures that I mentioned about the related to COVID, for the support of the economy during the COVID-19, the support for the health sector, the vaccines, providing additional funds there, and in agriculture and student meals and other policies announced by the government, we'll continue supporting those. So from that aspect, we can say that the budget is within its projections. It's in a good state. to support the ambitious policies for support of the economy during the pandemic. And we have several categories there, both in regard to the economy and in regard to the socially vulnerable categories and in the healthcare sector. So these are the main issues related, the main aspects related to the budget, but the support of the economy, it's not only injected liquidity, but also the measures are more targeted and focusing on increasing the investments. And not only that, but last year we had the urgent measures in order to save the companies. Now we are not only working on that to help those with losses, but those that have profits to be able to create new jobs, to make new investments. So we are fully dedicated to this area. So we have 25 million euros from the Development Bank for the guarantee fund, 5 for the guarantee fund, which is almost, which already has 10, now it has 15 million euros, and then Fanny for no interest loans for the companies, and 10 million euros for investments and development for the companies to increase their competitiveness, etc., etc. So several things that should provide support of the economy and investments during this period. Apart from that, what we have here, and with this I will stop because I'm sure there will be a discussion. What's important when it comes to the budget, when it comes to the funding of this deficit, we focused on half of it to be funded with national domestic loans, and the other half with loans from abroad, and that's to create opportunities for developing adequate monetary policy. And the governor, I'm sure, will say a little bit more about this, but this was especially important during this period and in the coming period, during which there have been increased expectations in regard to the inflation, but we expect for this to stabilize because of the expansion that exists in all the countries. What's good for this period is the level at the midterm to have sustainable program for fiscal consolidation in regard to the public debt and the budget deficit, and at the same time to support investments that would accelerate the growth from 5% in average in the next 5 years. Thank you. It's good to hear this kind of optimistic predictions. Ms. Bezhovska, the central bank, is very precise in regard to the predictions about the growth. You predict 3.9 growth. If this is achieved next year, we should expect to go back to the pre-crisis period. But there is another scenario. What if the crisis continues and the growth will drop for 1 point? So my question is, which scenario do you think will come true? And secondly, the government is a little bit bigger optimist when it comes to growth, and they're talking about 6% of growth, but that's not seen neither in the IMF or the National Bank predictions. And after your answer, the government representatives can give their answers as well. Thank you.
Okay, first, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate, and it is really a great pleasure and satisfaction for me to take part. With regard to the growth of the Macedonian economy, what is really important, and I would like to underline, is that besides the national services and the effectiveness of national policies, it is very important to see the recovery of the global economy and of the European economy, because we are very open economy. First, we are open in financial aspect, and the second one in trade or in commerce-related aspects. If you see the statistics, you will see that we are the most open economy in the Western Balkan and number 5 economy in openness in the Central and Eastern Europe. That is why we do not have a dilemma that the dynamics of recovery of the global and of the European economy will also affect our recovery. We know that we export 80% of the exports to EU, but also we are financially dependent, which means that most of the financial inflows that come to our economy as foreign direct investment, as loans, portfolio investments, come from the EU. So in this context, we have to ask ourselves what are the expectations for the global and the European economy, because this will also determine the recovery of our economy and the reality of our scenarios. In global aspects, we can see that there are some positive trends and positive expectations, and the IMF and other financial institutions project the global growth at 6%. But it is very much to underline that there will be a different dynamics in recovery. So what are the expectations for EU? Solid growth, more than 4% growth. And then we come to the question, to what extent our predictions are realistic. When we do the projections as Central National Bank, we start from the expectations for our most important trading partners. So we expect maximum growth to the potential of our economy, which we assess it to be about 4%. The central banks, they always prepare alternative scenarios, which is always done in situations when there is a high risk of uncertainty. This is specifically the scenario that you have mentioned. So what is the essence of this scenario? We predict slower recovery of the foreign economies that actually drive our economy. So that is why we have a different scenario, alternative scenario, that has a growth of 1% less. So what is the probability of these risks taking place? Well, according to me, the risk is very low. Because after the fall of 3.5% in the first quarter, now all the indicators and all the surveys that are being made by the European institutions point to the fact that there will be a solid recovery in the second quarter, and this will be even bigger in the second half of the year. So that is why the European Central Bank has revised their expectations from 4 to 4.6 and from 4.1 to 4.7 for this and next year. And another important thing, that since the beginning of the pandemic, the European Central Bank has shared mostly decreasing trends, and now they are sharing a balanced approach. So why we do not predict higher growth rates? We as a central bank, we have to be prudent. That is why we are a central bank. We have to be moderate in the projections and in the predictions. Of course, a higher growth might take place, but as I have said, in the midterm, our growth rates are in line with the assessed potential of the economy. However, we do not take into consideration the assumptions for a greater intensification of the structural reforms, which as a tool could serve to initiate additional growth. Only in this way we will have faster growth, but still in sustainable manner. So what are the structural elements? We well know them. there are a lot of challenges affecting the three long-term growth factors: workforce, productivity, and the physical scope of the equity or the capital. Just to illustrate, the productivity of the physical scope of capital in our country is 35% from the European average. So we need more investment. We need state investment. We need private investment. The productivity is even lower. And with regard to the workforce, we actually have three factors to be considered: the demographic factors and the migration. If we take into consideration the fact that the people migrating from the country are highly educated people, then we're not only losing quantity of workforce, but also quality. So if all this becomes true, the companies, domestic and foreign companies, which were also affected by the crisis. So if these optimistic prognoses come true and take place, probably the companies will be the first ones seeing or feeling this. So what can you tell us, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, what could you tell us about the problems of the companies in the last year, and what do you consider of the measures undertaken by the government? First, I would also like to thank the organizer for inviting me to take place on this forum. I come from the Chamber of Commerce, which is the oldest and the most numerous chamber in the country. Next year we'll celebrate 100 years of existence, and our companies, 50% of the total turnover of the private sector and 50% of the net profit of the private sector is made by our members. Every third employee in the private sector is employed in one of our members. So from this point of view, I think that we have a relevant position to assess the situation in our economy. With regard to the measures, I would like to divide the companies and the measures into three groups. The first groups are companies that really, without the state assistance, would not have survived the consequences of the pandemic. For them, definitely the best measure was the measure for supporting the salaries. And most of the companies in this group have survived due to this measure. The second group were companies that had potential to deal with the consequences, but they still needed some financial boost in order to have liquidity. And for them, the best measures were those interest-free loans and other type of loans that were made available by the development bank. And the third group were companies that had capacity to go through the pandemic by their own, that invested even in a situation like that. And for them it was very important, the state completely and fully to implement their obligations in line with the loan financial support of investment, so that their investment during the pandemic could still become reality. So if we focus on the consequences, the data show that in March this year, in comparison to March last year, the number of employees in the private sector has been reduced for approximately 5%, or for 32,000 employees. And the strike was biggest in three sectors: in the transport sector, where the number of employees was reduced for 21%, in the tourism and catering for 20%, and in construction for 6%. However, considering the situation as a whole, we could say that the measures that have been adopted by the government have assisted the private sector and have facilitated their operation during the pandemic. The important thing is that this situation will last, and at the end of this year, as most of the companies in the world will not go magically back to the situation where we were at the end of 2019, before the pandemic struck. So that is why it is very, very important what will be done in this year and in the next year. What might be a little bit counterintuitive is to say that in the period so far, in a way, it was easier to get funds for financing the measures that were used to assist the companies, because there was some maneuvering room, space for taking loans, and in most of it part it has been used. So now we have to be, and the government has to be very careful in planning the future period so that it can provide funds for further assisting the private sector. We'll go back to the measures once again because I would like to explain them a little bit better. But I would like to ask now the President of the Council of the Foreign Investors how the foreign investors see this year that has passed. One of the key solutions were, of course, bigger investments. So was this possible? Ви благодарам што ме поканивте и ви честитам на овој значаен настан. Навистина ми е мило што сум тука. Да, кога зборуваме за последната година и за последното тромесечје, сушност изгледаат бројките страшни, меѓутоа потребна ни е сила за раст, особено за да го поддржиме БДП. Јас би ја цитирал Светската банка кога ќе кажам дека мора двоен раст да имаме од оние држави членки во ЕУ, бидејќи економскиот раст од 5% секоја година, со ваков раст ќе бидат потребни 60 години за работниците од Северна Македонија да дојдат до иста просечна плата како таа во ЕУ. А мислам дека никој од нас не сака да чека 60 години за такво нешто. Значи, имајќи ги предвид сите овие теми, си реков, Штефан, те молам, немој да зборуваш за монетарна политика и за фискална политика, ќе се обидам да го одржам моето ветување, меѓутоа мораме да разбереме кои мерки можеа да бидат преземени. Се подсетувам на мојот професор по економија кој што ми велеше дека БДП се состои од лична потрошувачка, инвестиции, трошење на владата и нето извоз. Сега во однос на личната потрошувачка, тоа е нели поврзано со куповната моќ. Како може да зголемиме куповната моќ на потрошувачите? Владата продолжи еден начин со зголемување на минимум платата, на минималната плата. Секако компаниите значи се благодарни за ова, сакаме да плаќаме повисоки плати, меѓутоа секој пат има една дилема и мислиме дека прво треба да ја зголемиме продуктивноста за да можеме да бидеме сигурни дека на одржлив начин можеме да ги плаќаме овие повисоки плати. А сега само што слушнавме дека продуктивноста во државата е подпросечната продуктивност во ЕУ, а на ова мора да работиме да се зголеми. Ова е еден начин со зголемувањето на платите. Другиот начин е со намалување на даноците и со тоа се зголемува куповната моќ. И мислам дека министерот за финансии е до мене, секако тешко е да смалите данок на приход од 10%. Еве, секако ако неодамна сте го намалиле ДДВ-то, како ќе го намалите повторно? Мислам дека владата направи се што можеше за да обезбеди ваква инекција во општеството и во куповната моќ на купувачите. Меѓутоа, мислам дека она што е многу важно, како што ние велиме секој пат во бизнисот, само она што се мери, само со тоа може да се управува, значи мора да се бориме против црната економија. Значи парите се губат таму и мислам дека е исклучително важно ова да се направи за да се зацели овој систем. Нешто друго што исто така беше споменато е миграцијата на работниците. Јас дури би го нарекол ова екзодус, буквално. Значи не само миграција, повеќе од 10.000 луѓе, едуцирани, луѓе со знаење, секоја година заминуваат од државата. И тоа само од Северна Македонија е оваа бројка. Со едноставна равенка, јасно е дека БДП не може да расте кога таквите луѓе се заминуваат, тие кои што имаат куповна моќ. Сега ќе речете, па да, тие може ќе се вратат, може ќе ги пратеат парите тука, ама што ако не го направат тоа? Таму имаат подобар животен стандард, таму каде што одат, имаат подобра работа. Значи, навистина ова мораме сериозно да го земеме предвид и мора да размислуваме како можеме ова место да го направиме поатрактивно за ваквиот тип на луѓе. Што се проблемите? И мислам дека треба да ги прашаме тие што се заменеле. Значи, дали е проблемот поврзан со стандардот на живот, дали платите само, дали работните услови, или пак проблемот е што сте морале да го подкупите лекарот во државната болница за да ве излечи. Значи, ако го знаете одговорот на ваквото прашање, тогаш може знаете против што се борите. Меѓутоа, исто така имаме и дополнителни ефекти, бидејќи оваа миграција ја намалува работната сила која што е достапна за идните странски инвестиции и за растот на странските инвестиции. Во однос на пристапувањето во ЕУ, исто така мора да се запрашаме во моментов како можеме ова место да го направиме подобро за живот за младите ученици, за младите студенти, за да останат тука и тука да си го бараат решението. Бидејќи порано или подоцна овој проблем навистина ќе стане нерешлив и сега да не повторувам она што го кажа нели амбасадорите, нема Европа, нема Европска унија без државите од Западен Балкан, порано или подоцна тоа ќе се реализира. Меѓутоа мора да се запрашаме ако ги добиеме овие 4 слободи што ги споменавме, слобода да живееме каде што сакаме во Европската унија и слобода да патуваме каде што сакаме и слобода да се избереме каде ќе работиме, тогаш кој од Германија ќе дојде во Битола и кој од Северна Македонија ќе оди во Берлин? Што мислите? А ако имаме неусогласеност помеѓу тие што сакаат да дојдат и тие што сакаат да си одат, треба денеска да се запрашаме како ќе го организираме сето ова за потребната работна сила и куповната моќ да останат тука, а да не си заминат кога ќе станеме членка во ЕУ. Во однос на потрошувачите, не мислам само на домашните потрошувачи, туку и на странските потрошувачи. Тука секако мора да го споменеме туризмот, кој што е најбрзо растечка економија во светот и мислам дека тука се уште не сме направиле доволно. Слободно можам да кажам, бидејќи јас сум австриец и гостин во вашата земја, иако веќе се чувствувам како граѓанин, мислам дека вашата држава е одлично туристичко место. Имате преубава природа, имате преубава храна, имате преубави вина, имате одлични сместувачки капацитети и имате совршено гостопримство. Морам да ви кажам дека сум патувал и сите овие работи реално ви ги кажувам. Значи сите овие состојки може да ја направат државата да биде туристичка дестинација број 1. Меѓутоа, за жал, некако не ни оди. Не добиваме доволно пари од туристите, тие што можеме да ги добиеме. И мислам дека дефинитивно на ова треба да се работи, бидејќи јас кога ги прашувам моите пријатели во Австрија што знаете за Македонија, па не знаат многу, можам да ви кажам. И мислам дека е потребно, и ова е порака за бизнисот, ако сакате да продадете нешто, нели не е поентава да излезете на плоштад и да продадете кафе и сладолед. Туку ако сакате нешто навистина да продадете нешто, мора да го рекламирате. И мислам дека во времето на ковид дефинитивно имавме оправдување зошто не сме го направиле тоа, меѓутоа сега веќе мора да почнеме сериозно да ја нудиме Македонија како туристичка дестинација. Во однос на инвестициите во бизнисот, ќе се обидам да бидам краток. Мислам дека владата многу добро ги организираше домашните средства и како тие беа наменети за поддршка на инвестициите во домашните нели компании со фондот за иновации и така натаму. И навистина ги ценам мерките и за странските директни инвестиции. Значи имаме директор на ТИРЦ, значи не само во индустријските зони, туку и во услужниот сектор. Има 130 компании кои што имаат промет околу 5 милиарди евра годишно, околу 5000 вработени вработуваат. Меѓутоа, ниту половина не доаѓаат од индустријските зони, ниту пак од сервисниот сектор, поради тоа не треба да ги подцениме ни нив. Сега, во однос на услужниот сектор, потребни им се локални корисници, локални купувачи, пристап до пазарот и лесен пристап до пазарот, а понекогаш имам чувство дека не сме го овозможиле до крај овој лесен пристап. Станува збор за правење бизнис во Северна Македонија, каде што, да речеме, имате одлични оценки статистички гледано, меѓутоа мислам дека последно бевме на 15-то место, предходно на 10-то, меѓутоа сега искрено ве прашувам, дали се чувствувате дека живеете во држава што е на 15-то или на 10-то место за doing business? Дали така го чувствувате? Сега кога ќе се ставам во функција како директор на ЕВН, значи компанија за дистрибуција на струја, ќе ви кажам една анегдота. Ми се јави еден пријател пред некој ден и ми вели, почна ми се жали, нели, прашуваше поврзаноста, сакаше да добие приклучок за струја за мала продавница и му требало 30 дена. И јас реков, 30 дена? Па тоа е супер. Во Австрија не може ни молер да најдеш за 30 дена. Зашто се жалиш? И тој го тогаш ја погледнав процедурата и нас ни беа потребни 27 дена за да добиеме дозвола, а физичката работа на приклучокот беше само 3 дена. Значи тогаш гледате дека нешто не чини. Значи зошто 90% од времето да се потребни за нели документација, а самата работа е некои мали проценти. Значи гледате и тука може да има подобрување. Во однос на трошењето на владата, ќе кажам само една реченица. Бидејќи единствениот лек за здравствената криза е вакцинацијата, тогаш единствениот лек за економската криза е исто така инекција со пари. Со цел да спречиме дополнителни штети, потребни се вакви финансиски инвестиции, така што немојте да се плашите од задолжување, нели поголем долг во однос на БДП, бидејќи во светот ретко има држави кои што имаат стабилна економија и мислам дека е важно што правите со тој долг, зашто ги користите тие средства што ќе ги земете. А ако ги инвестирате во одржливи проекти кои што на сите ни се потребни и кои што се потребни за да се задржат луѓето во државата, како здравство, како образование, дигитализација, комуникации, енергетика, кои што ќе овозможат реализирање на зелени мерки со подобра грижа за животната средина. Значи, ако го инвестирате овие задолжени или земени пари во сето ова, тогаш мислам дека е оправдано да се задолжува државата. И сега уште на крај една реченица во однос на нето извозот. Мојата препорака тука е, еве да речеме кога ќе ги прашам моите австрийски колеги кои производи ви се познати од Северна Македонија, тие би велат ајвар. И тоа е добро, што значи дека може да изградите еден бренд по кој што ќе бидете препознатливи, имате производ кој што можете да го продавате во странство, меѓутоа не треба да биде само ајварот, треба да бидат повеќе производи и сметам дека со владина помош дефинитивно има повеќе производи кои што може да бидат препознатливи. И ако сакате да извезувате повеќе, мора повеќе да произведувате. Ако сакате да произведувате повеќе, мора да бидете поконкурентни, мора редовно да одите на работа, мора да ја зголемите продуктивноста. Зголемената продуктивност е последната реченица од она што го кажувам и дозволете ми исто така да цитирам нешто од нешто друго што е поврзано со онаа дискусија за слободен ден недела, дека тоа не е добра мерка ако сакате да ја зголемите продуктивноста.
Thank you for your address. You mentioned several topics that are very important. The tax policy that the Ministry of Finance will touch upon. I'm guessing that the Vice Prime Minister would like to make a comment, especially in regard to the difficult administrative procedures and maybe about the non-working Sunday. Probably more than those two comments, but also in regard to what the governor mentioned and your dilemma about why we are a little bit different in the projections about with the central bank and why we are so optimist. I'm inclined to saying that I fully agree that our economy is dependent on the more developed economies, but the fact that we entered an economic crisis, which I'm guessing for some hasn't been seen for some time at a global level, and the time of recuperation cannot be foreseen, and that's where we differ in the expectations from the recovery. I will just share one example, an example which goes along with our optimism, and nobody expected the recovery of the airlines. That's one of the worst struck industries in the course of last year. The initial expectations were that only at the end of 24 they could go back to the figures from 2019. In the second quarter, just as we entered the second quarter, the figures showed that the aviation industry is recovering much faster than the predictions, and they expect the recovery to happen sooner. And we should make use of this momentum. And I believe in the other sectors, the recovery will happen much sooner than what we think at the point, because it's difficult to have a forecast. Look at the figures in tourism, where with the initial opening of the borders, in some of the countries, there is always much higher figures than the countries themselves thought they would. Secondly, I think that in regard to the growth of the GDP, another difference, I think that if we have time, I will point this out, but I will just mention here that we fully agree that there are three parameters that should contribute for the economic growth: workforce, productivity, and the physical capital, and that's in the investment plan. Knowing this, we give a proposal for the coming period of 5 to 7 years to have a significant, huge number of investments, both private and public investments. In additionally, especially because with the public investments, they have to come from the public sector, and the Minister of Finance, I'm sure, will add something. We provide alternative ways of funding which are not traditional, and we keep talking about, and we probably share the same opinion. What is the additional capacity for taking loans by the state? But we will talk about other ways of financing and of the public investments, something that the Minister of Finance will talk about. The other issue, how we will position ourselves in regard to the private investments, and we will continue supporting them just as we did that during the pandemic time. A very important step we did during the year of pandemic, and it's the least mentioned one, with the regular programs for support of investments. Last year we had a record year for the last 30 years. Almost 70 million euros were used for the support of national and foreign investors or investments during the year of pandemic. For the first time, the support was 100% from the agreed obligations, even though the law gave us an opportunity to not to go that far. But we said no, that meant the growth, and that's why we decided to go with it. We had so many other legal changes that this could meant structural change of our country. The intervention plan for investments, the measures for the support of investments were done in a way to define in the mid and long term change in the economic structure, contrary to supporting everything and anything, because we believe only by significantly increasing the percentage of production industry in the structure of GDP, we would be able to talk about sustainable economic growth, and maybe that would be the answer to Mr. Stefan, that yes, that's the only way in the midterm to reach double growth of the GDP in order to reduce the discrepancy, the difference that exists between us and the EU member countries. Thank you. We'll have to be we will have to close this panel because we have lunch. Mr. Besime, do you have a brief comment? Very briefly, in regard to the positions of, in regard to the projections, it's normal, it's common to have a difference between the government in its projections and the finances and the budget and the national bank, the central bank. And it's good that, and it's natural, not only good for the central bank to be more conservative in the context of the monetary policy. It means that there won't be contra-cycle because if it's too expensive, they're obligated to be more restrictive in regard to the interest rate. And from the fiscal aspect, when we are planning more, it means that we are spending more. So, but regardless of the projections, we are coordinating ourselves when it comes to the figures, and that's a natural way. In regard to the tax policy, it has to serve the model of growth, to support the growth, the factors of growth. And in that context, the current reforms that started as a process, a very inclusive process aimed at they're all in that direction, and they should be focused on being not only efficient but to be fair and to be simple. And in that sense, we are working on important aspects such as reducing the informal economy, combating grey economy, and improving the payments, not just to make payments, but to offer better services, digitalization of that system. In addition, also, one of those components are the green taxes that represent a trend in the global economy for the support of investments that would mean sustainable growth. These are policies that that will ensure increased and sustainable growth, digitalization, support of human capital, green investments, etc. Everything that I'm talking about. We are integrated economy within the region and the European Union, and we are rather open economy, and our tax policies are not fully independent in regard to what's happening in the region, especially when it comes to taxation. There have been already international initiatives for harmonization in that area. That's all I have to say in the interest of time. We and the reforms in the tax policy are aimed at supporting the growth, and this position will design the solutions on which we are working. I have two final questions, one for the governor and the other one for Mr. Jovanovski. What's the credit activity of the banks towards the companies? And for Jovanovski, you've said from the position of the Chamber of Commerce is that the difficulty will emerge when the state will withdraw its support, or how the companies should deal with this situation. The governor, you have the shock from unforeseen scope requires adequate reaction. And one of the features within the global framework, if we look at the conduct of the central banks now in comparison to the global economic crisis, is that the central banks are responding faster, stronger, and they used wider instruments, and the support was more balanced and better coordinated with the fiscal policy. I would say that all these features, all these characteristics at a global level also our feature. As a central bank, we undertook numerous measures, both standard and non-standard measures, and the idea was to support the credit activity because that's the segment where the central bank could contribute the most in order to mitigate the consequences of this big shock. Whether the measures we have undertaken provided results, we need to look at two parameters: what happened with the financial conditions in our country, the access to loans, and the price of the loans. I would only say that this is the first crisis episode in our history in which we were able, as a central bank, from the very beginning of the crisis, to carry out relaxed monetary policy. Why? Because during the previous episodes we had huge pressures on the foreign exchange markets, and we need to maintain a stable course of the national currency. You have to have in mind that there was today, continuously, we have been relaxing of the monetary policy, whether there is transmission towards the interest rates in the banks. Yes, we have that. That's evident from the statistics. That's evident from the survey carried out by the central bank. That's the first segment. And how to influence the credit activity. I'm trying to give you the entire context. It had a positive effect on the load activity. It didn't slow down last year, but there was some acceleration. There was 6% in average. These figures have been maintained this year, according to the latest data. We have a good credit activity of 6%, even though it's a fact that most of the credit activity is towards the population in comparison to the cooperative sector. In general, I believe that the measures and the coordinative approach of the policymakers had results. If you just give me a chance to have the answer by Mr. Jovanovski, because it's very important, because this is important for all the companies, not only the Macedonian companies. Thank you. The most important thing that has to happen this summer is efficient vaccination. That is very important, not only for the society, but also for the business sector.
Eva.
We had... Sorry, there was a problem with the equipment.
Немаме мака да падна системов.
Се извинувам, има проблем со техниката. Како?
Збори на англиски.
At the time when I attended a school there was an interest to work, and that there is a huge potential in that sense that we should all, and I'm talking about the year of 2002, 19 years, 20 years before resolving the big political issue which is now behind us. The Chamber of Commerce signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Chamber of Economy and Industry. I think that the region, in the coming 5 or 10 years, there will be a huge regional story, something which is known as Chamber Investment Forum for the 6 countries of the Western Balkans, and our chamber is member of that chamber. I believe that the position of Greece for this regional economic story is excellent. They can be the engine of the regional economic development. We have to be clever, we have to be smart, we have all the necessary preconditions to increase that collaboration. A small indicator in the end, 2 months or 3 months ago, the number of people tested with PCR tests for COVID was about few thousand. Out of those few thousand, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 50 to 20% were people who were had positive, and the others negative. They got a vaccination because there was a suspicion that they were sick. And now again we have only 10 people who are positive out of several thousand. And why do they do the test? Because they want to go on a holiday in Greece, and not because they suspect that they might have been infected. So the potential is there. We should be smart, and all the opportunities for better economic cooperation to be used. Thank you all. Thank you. I would like to thank the panel and the organizers. The fact that some of their questions haven't been answered, that these are very important topics, and we should continue with that, maybe in a different format, at a different location. Now I would like to invite you to lunch, room number 3, because it's hot outside. The lunch will be served inside. Thank you.